The scheme went as planned. Umar Trab collapsed in full public view and, after a short and quiet ceremony, was placed within the catacombs. Akmotesh, using a small portion of his wealth, acquired access and egress to the catacombs, after which he helped Umar flee the city with a pack of scant belongings and a reliable horse. The ruse worked. The Brotherhood of the Black Star was both convinced and pleased with Vendar's alleged assassination, perhaps too much, as they called upon him once more for his, as they saw it, lethal services. Once more, Akmotesh used his knowledge of pharmaceuticals and diplomacy to secure the target's escape from the city, but Vendar feared they had reached an impasse. "We can't keep doing this," he said once their second escape attempt had been completed to fruition. "Sooner or later there'll be problems." "Do you think you can learn the location of their high temple soon?" "That's a problem. I think I've become too useful to them. People who go to the high temple meet Zurzelzig, whatever that means. I don't know what happens there, but the people who go seldom come back. But people that are useful, people who give them lots of money, people who recruit others, they don't go to the temple because, once they do, that's one less useful member in their ranks. They think I'm useful." This concerned Akmotesh, but, for the time being, he was at a loss of how to proceed, and so he proceeded the only way there was to go, forward. For, as he had learned long ago, though more often than not problems would continue until someone brought it upon himself to stop them, sometimes problems solved themselves. "I discovered where the high temple is," Vendar said emphatically one night. He had arrived at Akmotesh's dwelling with a flurry of frantic knocks on the priest's door, galvanized with the success of his breakthrough. Akmotesh wasted no time. "Where is it?" "To the north, on the plains beyond the foothills. A small caravan is leaving within a couple of weeks, going to deliver a new batch of faithful, I suppose. We'll have to follow them from a distance." "I don't think so. I can get us some cloaks. I doubt anyone will be keeping a very close eye on each individual member. We can probably fit right in. I know when and where they're departing. But we'll need to bring weapons." Vendar frowned. "You're right." "Is the temple guarded? Did you find out?" "As far as I understand, mostly cultists with martial backgrounds, but I don't think it's anything we can't handle. Despite the fact they conduct assassinations from time to time, it's still a cult, not a paramilitary organization." Vendar continued to give Akmotesh the pertinent information regarding the caravan and their trip, and Akmotesh listened intently. When all was said and done, there was only one last question on the Chemite's mind, a question that, while largely inconsequential, still burned in the back of his brain. "How did you come across this information?" "I've seen you use medicines and venoms to achieve your goals. Well, it might surprise you to know that I also have some skill with pharmaceuticals. I know an old formula for a truth-telling potion. It consists mostly of wine." The pair spent the following weeks in preparation for their departure to the high temple of the Brotherhood of the Black Star. Vendar obtained rope and hook sets, as well as various implements of thievery, while Akmotesh readied a variety of eldritch trappings for healing wounds, warding evil, and, for worst-case scenarios, destroying adversaries. The thought of the Brotherhood's prohibition on bronze and copper also lingered on the priest's mind. It was likely nothing, an odd quirk of an odd cult, but there was something about the idea that made it persist in his thoughts. For this reason, he procured a basic set of bronze armor and weapons. He also acquired cured beef liver, sesame seeds, and certain edible mushrooms to be used as rations on their journey. Finally, Akmotesh sought the aid of Gwala, the great hunter from the jungles of Zumbuku. One of the priest's oldest and most stalwart of allies, Akmotesh had, until now, abstained from beseeching his help, as his mission required a large degree of subtlety in appearances, and the Zumbucan, with his black skin and strange language, would doubtlessly draw attention. Now, however, Gwala's skill in tracking and stealth would be a valuable asset. The rest of the days leading up to the team's departure passed without incident, and Vendar's services as an assassin were not needed. So, the day came at last when the caravan left for the high temple of the Brotherhood of the Black Star, with Akmotesh, Vendar, and Gwala following. Gwala's keen sight helped them keep track of the pilgrims when they were visible on the horizon. His tracking ability held them when they weren't, and at length, after passing through foothills and back onto the plains, A great ziggurat could be seen in the distance. It was evening as the heroes approached, and the last vestiges of the sun's red plumes streaked across the sky as it finished its descent below the horizon. Here and there, white-cloaked figures could be seen milling about. Not wishing to draw attention to themselves by approaching armed, Vendar and Akmotesh donned the cloaks which the former had provided and walked to the ziggurat while Gwala waited behind with their horses and equipment. The temple was quite an impressive edifice. A massive stone structure, it consisted of several different levels, each built on top of the other, and getting smaller the higher they went. Great wide stairs ascended the complex, terminating at each floor in a stone archway before continuing on up. "Greetings, brothers," spoke a female cultist as they approached. She had a young but slightly gaunt face framed with long, thin hair that spilled out from her hood. "The glory of Zirzalzig shine upon you." "And you," replied Vendar. "Are you new arrivals at the High Temple?" "We are," said Akmotesh. "We were scheduled to arrive sooner, but became separated from our group. We caught up just recently." "Well, welcome. My name is Amalia. We're happy to have you join us, and hope that soon you'll be chosen to join the living God at the top of the temple," said the woman dreamily. "So, Zirzalzig is at the top?" asked Vendar, motioning to the highest floor of the ziggurat. "Yes, but only those who are chosen are allowed to enter. It is locked, and only Ushtar Nin has the key, though these days it is his chief priest, Neothophilis, who guides the chosen through the door." "I've heard Ushtar Nin is seen less and less these days," Vendar said. "Yes, I've never seen him myself. The last people to see him have already become one with our God. They say that, since he communes with Zirzalzig without joining him in body, it takes a toll on his earthly form. I don't quite understand what that means, but he must use Neothophilis as his intermediary." "And where does Ushtar Nin reside?" asked Akmotesh. "The second floor. The only one to enter and leave is Neothophilis, and even he doesn't live on the second floor. His quarters are on the first floor with the rest of us." "Ah, there?" Akmotesh pointed to the first archway up the stairs. "Yes, that's where those waiting to be chosen spend their remaining days. Would you like me to show you?" "Please." Amalia led them up the broad steps. "Where are you from?" she asked as they ascended. "Zeldramar," said Akmotesh, "though originally Al-Kashir." "I'm from Korsk," Amalia stated. Vendar was surprised. "Korsk? I didn't realize the Brotherhood stretched that far." "Oh yes, our influence reaches far and wide and is growing more every day." The three continued up the steps, past other cultists going about their business, to the first floor. Here they passed through a stone archway and then through a door to a large, spacious enclosure where more cultists could be found, reclining on modest furniture and chatting with each other. The chamber was quite nice. Well-polished tile floors stretched before them, and colorful tapestries covered the far-spaced walls. There was even a small garden filled with lush plants and fruit-bearing trees in the center. Here and there, Akmotesh could see various symbols of the cult, mainly stylized black stars. He realized, however, that nowhere were there any images of the cult's god or high priest. He found this odd. "This is the common area where we socialize. Beyond, you can find the dining hall where meals are served, and also the communal sleeping quarters divided for men and women. I can show you more if you'd like. The ascension isn't until later tonight." "The ascension, when the faithful are chosen to join Zirzalzig," said Vendar. "Yes, it was lucky you arrived when you did. You might have missed the ceremony otherwise." Amalia showed the pair around the rest of the complex. It was sometimes modest, sometimes surprisingly elaborate, but always comfortable. They were offered a meal, and they noticed that fare in the temple was fairly limited, consisting mostly of rice and certain vegetables. They were able to locate a hallway, down which lay a guarded door. Amalia explained it was the dwelling place of Neothophilis, Ushtar Nin's second in command. Hours passed, and the evening had long ago given way to night when a great gong sounded throughout the chamber. "That's the call. Let's go. Maybe one of us will be chosen," said Amalia with excitement. Vendar and Akmotesh exchanged nervous glances. Akmotesh, Vendar, and Amalia moved outside. There, all the inhabitants of the temple lined the sides of the ziggurat's massive steps, which were now lit by a series of blazing torches. Excited mutterings of anticipation echoed through the crowd as they waited for the ceremony to commence. Suddenly, the door to the second floor opened, and a figure stepped out. He had a handsome and haughty face, and his robe, well similar to those of the other cultists, consisted of a black chasuble. In one hand, a star-shaped object dangled from a chain. "Neothophalis," whispered Amalia. "Brothers and sisters of the Black Star," shouted the figure in a commanding yet warm voice, "once again we find ourselves gathered here for the ceremony of ascension. This evening, 5 of you will reach the ultimate state of being by becoming one with the living God, our great benefactor and savior from beyond the stars, Zurzalzig. Your paths have been long and arduous, but now, at last, you will know true bliss and harmony. For those of you not selected this night, know your time will be soon. Now let the names of the chosen be called. Let them step forth and present themselves to make the ascent into the tabernacle to meet the living God." Neothophalis produced a scroll from within his raiment and unrolled it. From this he read the names of the chosen. As each name was read, a person stepped forth from the crowd and ascended the steps to stand beside him. One of the people chosen was Amalia herself. Upon hearing her name, her eyes grew wide with excitement. She gave a quick glance to her new friends, who, in turn, gave awkward and uncomfortable looks of congratulations before she turned to join the others. Akmotesh took note of his surroundings. Though not heavily guarded, there was a retinue of surly, white-cloaked guards armed with bows and lethal-looking broadswords posted at strategic positions along the ziggurat. He considered rushing up the steps, murdering Neothophalis, and putting an end to the ceremony, with which he was rapidly becoming more and more uncomfortable, but realized he would likely be shot down if he attempted. Furthermore, while these cultists seemed innocent and docile now, he reminded himself they were also trained to kill in defense of their faith. He decided to hold his action now and act quickly later. Neothophalis walked up the steps with the others in tow. Upon reaching the topmost door of the temple, he reached down and grasped the star-shaped object that hung from his wrist. Akmotesh squinted his eyes, straining to watch the procedure. It looked as though the trinket was placed in a socket in the door and rotated, after which a loud clunking sound reverberated from atop the ziggurat. 2 great metal doors swung open, revealing a ghastly red lambent glow issuing from within. Akmotesh's stomach was heavy with dread as he watched Ushtar-Nin's bishop guide the 5 cultists inside the door, muttered a few indecipherable words, and closed the gate behind them with a final, terminal clang. Akmotesh could sense Vendar looking at him for directions and answers. Quickly he turned to his friend and gestured for him to follow. Together, the 2 of them silently and urgently slipped through the crowd to the bottom of the stairs and away from the temple. When they were a safe distance away, the Kemite turned to his friend and said, "The time has come to put an end to this accursed cult, or die trying. Let us arm ourselves." Akmotesh and Vendar rejoined Gwala, and together they prepared themselves for their raid on the temple of the Brotherhood of the Black Star. When they returned to the temple, the ceremony had largely concluded, and the remaining members of the cult were retiring to their dormitories for the evening. Gwala, too, was given a cloak, and together the group equipped weaponry, shirts of mail, and other light supplies, stashing the remainder of their equipment among some stones at the rear base of the temple. Their goal was the tabernacle, the topmost chamber into which the chosen had been sealed. They knew not what lay inside, along with that horrible red glow, but they meant to find out and end it. Though guards were positioned at doors of importance, there seemed to be little attention given to the rear part of the temple, so it was here that the team decided to launch their raid. The temple's walls, while steep, were built at a slight angle which made them climbable with the rope and other implements they had brought. The sky was without moon that evening, though many stars sparkled in the firmament above, giving them the light they needed, while at the same time shrouding them with darkness. As an added measure, Akmotesh spoke prayers and spells, calling upon the realm of the dead to cloak them with an eldritch gloom that recalled the shadows of ancient tombs. Thus prepared, they began their ascent up the ziggurat. They had succeeded in climbing to the first level. Gwala peered over its edge in search of any guards that might be patrolling the region and, after seeing none, clicked to his allies that it was clear to ascend. No sooner had they hoisted themselves up, however, than a white-cloaked figure, an errant cultist wishing to partake of the night air as a cure for insomnia most likely, walked around the corner. He hadn't seen them yet, but if he drew any closer, they risked losing their cover. Quickly, Gwala produced a long, thin tube, placed it to his lips, and gave a short, vigorous huff. Immediately, the cultist's hand rose to his neck in response to the perceived bite of a nocturnal insect intent on attaining a late-night meal. To his surprise, he found not a crushed fly, but a thin, quill-like projectile. He had only a moment to look at it wonderingly before his vision began to swim, his equilibrium falter, and his body collapse. Satisfied that the potent sleeping cocktail with which Akmotesh had anointed the hunter's darts would keep the cultist incapacitated for hours, they quickly prepared to resume their climb up the temple. Reaching the second level of the ziggurat went without incident, and soon that, too, was left below the warriors as they found themselves standing at the structure's apex. Here they stealthily made their way around to the front. All the while a feeling of dread persisted in Akmotesh's bones. Who knew what unknown horrors lay just beyond the wall to his side? What nightmarish hell existed, mere yards away from him, kept at bay by only simple stone? He repressed a shudder as he realized he would soon find out. Surprisingly, no guards waited at the door to the tabernacle or anywhere else on this level. Akmotesh briefly pondered what this could mean as he drew closer to inspect the entrance. The gate to the tabernacle consisted of a large iron double door. Surprisingly, it was relatively unadorned save for a few modest decorations and flourishes typical of a high-quality portal. It lacked, however, any religious symbolism or protective spells. If a god truly did lurk within, it had little concern for ceremony or protection. Akmotesh continued to examine the door. He saw no evidence of traps, either physical or arcane, but the locking mechanism was something unfamiliar to him, an iron panel into which was set a star-shaped indentation about the size of a man's palm. He remembered seeing Neothophilis use a strange key-like device on the door, and reasoned this must be what he required. "We need the key," Akmotesh murmured, turning back to his companions. "Neothophilis," said Vendar. "No, the girl said only Ushtar Nin has the key, and that Neothophilis acquires it from him for the ascension ceremony." "Downstairs, then." Akmotesh nodded. Going down was easier than going up, and the two guards that waited atop the stairs to the second floor were completely unprepared for assailants to approach them from above. Gwala's darts made short work of them. Like the topmost floor, this level also had a wrought iron double door, though this one was considerably smaller and lighter than the one above, and, unlike the latter, had a variety of symbols and glyphs etched upon its surface. Akmotesh recognized these for what they were, not symbols of religious significance, but rather eldritch runes used by wizards, sorcerers, and others who sought to tap into powers beyond the ken of mankind so as to bend reality to their wills. Specifically, they seemed to be symbols designed to keep out intruders who sought ill will to the resident within. This was only a minor setback, as the chemish priest had become well learned in the ways of sorcerers, as well as how to combat them. He reached into his robe and withdrew a small stick of white chalk. With this, he quickly inscribed his own symbols upon the door, all the while uttering prayers of dispelling. Meanwhile, Gwala clicked to Vendar in his exotic jungle tongue, directing the warrior to help him search the catatonic bodies of the guards for any keys they might have on their persons. The search revealed nothing. "Can you pick the lock?" Vendar whispered. "Neothophilis probably has the only key." "We have no time for that," replied Akmotesh. His thoughts were centered on those who had been chosen to enter the tabernacle. They were probably already with Anubis. If so, the god would certainly welcome them, though he would be supremely irritated at their arrival in his kingdom before their preordained time. The priest took a moment to look at the lock on the door. Unlike the one above, this was of a more mundane design, consisting of a conventional keyhole. He had prepared for this kind of obstacle and, reaching into a pouch bound to his belt, withdrew a shriveled brown human hand with strips of cloth dangling from desiccated flesh and a shiny, strangely toothed key held fast in its ancient fingers. Akmotesh guided the key, with mummified hand still attached, into the keyhole. It fit without resistance. Stepping back, the warrior priest traced an ancient hieroglyph in the air before him, while speaking a word of command in a language long forgotten by man. Incredibly, the hand and key pivoted, opening the door with a loud click. Akmotesh placed the hand of Kings back into its linen bag and procured another implement, the heavy, sickle-shaped sword with which he had destroyed many foes, both earthly and supernatural. the hieroglyphic Khopesh known as Soul Thresher. Gwala and Vendar likewise readied their weapons, Gwala removing a bow from his back and knocking an arrow in it, Vendar preparing a spiked war flail. As soon as they opened the door, their nostrils were assaulted with stench. To Gwala's keen senses, it seemed to be a combination of the stale air of unventilated chambers along with that of unwashed and unhealthy humanity. But this was covered up by a third, much more overpowering smell that was nothing like the hunter had ever experienced before, something that was profoundly disturbing, not only for its malodor, but for the pure alienness of it. It reeked of nothing either natural or supernatural, but rather of something completely different, yet wholly repugnant. Ugh, Vendar sighed, turning his head in disgust at the stench. The warriors entered into a spacious vestibule lit by the dancing flames of torches mounted on a series of 4 pillars spaced throughout. At the far end, a small set of steps led to an empty seat. Their eyes swept the chamber for anyone, or anything, waiting in ambush. It seemed empty. No signs of life were to be found, though drops of a strange pink substance crossed the stone floor in random places. Akmotesh poked the fluid with the edge of his sword. It was slightly gelatinous, but not sticky. They followed a passage that exited the vestibule, down a hallway, and at length to a room that appeared to be a study or a library. Shelves of scrolls and tomes lined the walls, with a tall podium in the middle, before which sat a tall chair. At one time it must have been a well-organized collection of literature, but now everything was scattered about in disarray. Books lay face down and open, while torn pages littered the floor, stained with the contents of spilled ink bottles. Once again, lines of the weird pink substance dotted the room. A brief examination of the literature revealed much of it to be about the stars and heavenly bodies, various religions, archaeology, and mythology, to name a few. Some of the papers and books also contained handwritten notes scrawled about the margins. These annotations' script was shaky, as though the hand that had drawn them was frantic with nerves, afraid, ill, or in an otherwise altered state of thought. Much of this marginalia seemed to be the fevered ravings of an unwell mind, weird geometrical figures, or doodles of grotesque and horrid creatures. Most was nonsensical, sayings scattered in non-contextual quotes such as reaching into the void or the well of darkness. Other times it was nothing more than meaningless words made of unpronounceable combinations of letters. One particularly notable piece of parchment had the same word written over and over again, filling the page and even being written on top of itself. Zurzelzig. There were several other rooms the party came across. One had a large fur-covered bed in the middle, with a substantial coating of dust upon its surface, but little of overall importance. The other location seemed to be a dining room, and here a long wooden table sat empty save for a single bowl filled with an unidentifiable black, viscous sludge. Through both chambers, the same crisscrossing trails of pink droplets could be seen. The party continued on, heading back to the vestibule to explore the other regions of the floor, when suddenly Gwala put out a hand, halting their progress. Something was wrong. The hairs on the back of his neck were standing on end, and the strange alien smell he had sensed earlier was stronger. His pace slowed to the stealthy creep of a predatory cat as he resumed his progress and tightened his grip on his arrow. When Akmotesh, Gwala, and Vendar had awoken that morning, they knew that, most likely, the day would involve combat and bloodshed. What they didn't know was that they would end up coming face to face with complete, irrational, and mind-breaking insanity. There, in the entry chamber, was something that vaguely had the shape of a large dog, or perhaps a great cat, with a body and 4 legs, but all resemblance to a creature of nature stopped there. Where the beast's head should have been was a ragged, stump-like hole from which protruded a trio of long, hinged appendages, similar to that of an insect's extremities. Its 4 legs were bizarrely jointed, bending in ways that didn't seem to make sense, and ended in weird, disc-shaped suckers. At the center top of the beast's back was a mass of what appeared to be large, tube-shaped, segmented worms, and these wriggled and writhed about with alarming vivacity. Whether these tubes were part of the creature, or were rather some kind of parasite, was impossible to tell. The beast had no tail, but instead, at the rear, was a large, pulsating, tumorous structure which glistened grotesquely. The whole beast was devoid of hair, instead being bound in a sickly pink flesh from which small tubercles extended. These protuberances seemed to perpetually drip pink fluid, which coated the entire creature and occasionally fell to the floor with a disgusting pattering noise. Akmotesh saw Vendar clap a hand to his mouth at the sight of the thing in order to stifle a scream, and even the battle-hardened Gwala, who had seen the cannibalistic rituals of the hostile jungle tribes, took a step back in shock and horror. Akmotesh himself felt as though his mind were struggling to keep its grip on reality. There was something about this creature that seemed to defy everything he knew about the world. But he quickly centered his thoughts. All this was irrelevant. He had a mission, and his hand tightened on his sword hilt. Akmotesh thought they were well hidden, there in the shadows of the firelight and shrouded by his sepulchral shadows. But somehow the creature detected their presence. It pivoted about on its strangely jointed legs and let out a horrible, shrieking, burbling noise as it did. Akmotesh didn't know where the sound issued from, as the monster seemed to have no mouth that he could see, but nonetheless it chilled him to the bone. With a weird, unnatural gait that was both puzzling and alarmingly fast, the creature dashed toward the team. Instinctively, Gwala let his arrow fly, and Vendar and Akmotesh assumed fighting stances. Gwala's arrow was true, but the thing ignored it even as the projectile embedded itself in its flesh. With a low gurgling sound, it launched itself at Vendar, who retaliated with his flail. While the warrior felt his weapon connect, it didn't hit entirely as he expected it to, and Vendar's brain reeled in unbelieving horror as he grappled the weird dog thing to the ground in his sinewy embrace. Momentarily, he felt his mind lapsing into insanity, the only safe refuge from the thing which now confronted him. But Vendar was a hardened adventurer who had fought off hordes of snakemen, survived the savage skugs, and even had a wife for a short time. He wasn't about to be beaten now. Even as the uncanny insect-leg's head scratched and clawed at his face, he kept his wits, rolling to the side to throw the beast off him. Meanwhile, Akmotesh wasted no time in setting upon the monster, bringing his khopesh down upon its body with all his might. It was a well-struck blow that should have cloven the foe in two. Instead, it only succeeded in wounding it, opening an ugly gash from which poured forth a ghastly black fluid. Another arrow flew into the beast from Gwala's bow, and again the monster ignored it, instead regaining its footing and leaping at Akmotesh. The priest didn't wish to make the same mistake as Vendar to end up grappling the monstrosity and attempted to sidestep the attack, but the beast pounced before he had time, knocking him too to the ground. This time the creature held fast, its sucker-like appendages rooting it to the floor and its body weight pinning Akmotesh. The Kemite tried his utmost to hold on to his sanity as the unearthly stench of the monster assaulted his nostrils and its sickening pink excretions dripped onto his skin. Akmotesh knew his touch of death wouldn't affect this supernatural being, so instead he tried something else, forcing his hand to the sheath near his waist, where a bronze short sword rested. With a swift jerk, he drew the weapon free of its scabbard, reached around, and plunged it into the monster's side. With a terrible, gurgling, ear-splitting shriek, the monster scrambled off the war priest, black fluid pouring freely through the wound. Akmotesh regained his feet. "Gwala, the bronze-tipped arrows!" he shouted. Immediately the hunter knocked one of the lusterless projectiles and released it, hitting the strange creature square on. It seemed to Akmotesh that it was a hit to the heart, but it only seemed to faze the beast. Nonetheless, it gave him an opening, and he struck again with his bronze sword, this time aiming for the base of what seemed to be the creature's head, that horrible nest of arachnoid appendages. The strike almost completely severed the leggy mass, but the creature didn't die instantly, as an earth creature would after suffering such a blow to the neck. Not wasting time, the priest followed up with several other thrusts at the beast's body, finally connecting with what must have been an oddly placed vital organ and causing the monster to drop to the ground.